All right, we are going to be back in the book of Luke this morning, chapter 9, verse 37. I believe that's page 867 in the Pew Bible. If you don't have a copy of Scripture, there's one right in front of you in the back of the pew. You can turn to page 867, and if I'm wrong about that page number, someone will correct me. I have 4 children, and as soon as I mention that, I know that there are 4 young people somewhere in this building, whether it's in this room or watching on TV out there, that go, no, is he going to talk about us? Only generically. I have 4 children, which means that I have seen 4 take their first step and learn to walk. It also means that roughly a month later, I have seen those same 4 children all of a sudden stop walking. I remain puzzled by this, and I think will forever. For some reason, my children, and I think this is true of most children, although I will freely admit that Anderson children are a different breed, and they get that entirely from their father. They would stop walking. They would go back to crawling. And I would ask my wife, who is a fountain of wisdom and knowledge, why are they not walking? And she would say, well, they're learning lots of things right now. And she would say it that way, as a teacher, instructing me. They're learning lots of things right now, many foundational things. And so they would learn to walk, and then they would almost, in a sense, check the box and then decide, all right, now I should work on something else, like putting my shoes on. And then a month later, guess what they weren't doing anymore? They weren't putting their shoes on. And they would go on to, well, now I'll work on putting my pants on. And they would get that. And then a month later, now they weren't walking or putting their shoes on or putting their pants on. My wife would say it was because they were learning foundational things. I would say it was to drive their father crazy. Well, eventually they got back to all of these things. They can now all 4 of them walk and put their shoes on and put their pants on, though sometimes they still choose not to. I know the Schweitzers, John and Laura, they've got tons of kids. They can identify with exactly what I'm saying. We are like that. That's actually the message of Luke chapter 9, verses 37 to 50. Luke wants you to know that you are spiritual toddlers trying to learn to walk and then forgetting how to do it. Trying to learn to put your shoes on and then forgetting how to do it. Trying to learn how to put your pants on and then forgetting how to do it. We are often a lot like toddlers. We get ourselves distracted and focused on other things, things that in our minds lead to maturity, but in reality mean we're just not walking anymore. So let's read the text. Verse 37 of chapter 9. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, remember this is right after the transfiguration. Jesus took 3 of his favorite up onto the mountaintop, and they've had this spiritual high, and they're coming down from the mountain. And a great crowd met him. And behold, a man from the crowd cried out, "Teacher, I beg you, look at my son, for he is my only child. And behold, a spirit seizes him, and he suddenly cries out. It convulses him, so that he foams at the mouth and shatters him, and will hardly leave him. And I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not." Jesus answered, O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here." While he was coming, the demon threw him to the ground and convulsed him, but Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit and healed the boy and gave him back to his father, and all were astonished at the majesty of God. But while they were all marveling at everything he was doing, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let these words sink into your ears. The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men." But they didn't understand this saying, and it was concealed from them so that they might not perceive it. And they were afraid to ask him about this saying. An argument arose among them as to which of them was the greatest. But Jesus, knowing the reasoning of their hearts, took a child and put him by his side and said to them, "Whoever receives this child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. For he who is least among you all is the one who is great." John answered, "Master, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him, because he doesn't follow with us." But Jesus said to him, "Do not stop him, for the one who is not against you is for you." The word of the Lord. Something in this first section, particularly 37 to 43, shouldn't sit right with us. We should read that and say, something is wrong here. Something is amiss. Jesus says in response, "O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to bear with you?" Something's wrong here. The question is what, obviously, but one of the more important questions I think that we should get down to is, who is Jesus talking to here? Jesus is certainly no stranger to bluntness. He's happy to speak his mind, but it seems an awfully blunt and maybe even a rude thing to say to this father who comes up and says, "Hey, this is my only son, and he's in a bad way. In fact, he's been in a bad way for a long time. Is there anything you could do? I tried already with your disciples, and they weren't able to do what I'm asking for." Is Jesus saying to this dad, faithless and twisted, perverted is another way to say that. The word there oftentimes was used of a potter who was spinning his wheel and had essentially over-rotated the wheel in such a way that the thing that he meant to create was no longer the thing that he had created. Is that what we're to take of this father here who comes to Jesus? I would say no. If anything, we see the same type of faith in this father as we do in Jairus, the chapter before, who comes and says, "Hey, my daughter is dying. Would you come with me and help her?" Or we see similar faith when Bartimaeus, the blind man, shouts out over the crowd, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And the thing that Jesus speaks to in those times when he actually responds to someone that's asking for help is, "Your faith has saved you." He actually commends people that act the way the Father does, not for faithlessness, not for being twisted or perverted, but for faith. And so he responds to the Father and grants to him what he asks. In a sense, by his actions, Jesus says, "Your faith has saved you. Your faith has healed you." We actually have the makings of a brilliant sermon in verse 42. It says, while the boy was coming, the demon threw him to the ground and convulsed him. The demon had absolute and total control and power over this young boy. And then Luke tells us, but Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit. The demon that had complete and total control over the boy was rendered utterly incapable and powerless before Jesus. And Jesus healed the boy. Actually, not just the present power of the demon was exercised in this boy's life. Jesus actually exercises all of it. He heals the boy and restores him and renders him back, so much so that he gives him back to his father in compassion and love. We see faith all over this father and his boy. So if Jesus isn't saying, faithless and twisted generation, how long am I supposed to put up with you? If he's not saying that to the father or to the boy, then who is he saying it to? I try and make it a habit of not contradicting John Calvin, but I will. Calvin looks at the Gospel of Mark and presumes that Jesus is actually speaking to the scribes that are present. But I would say that one, in the book of Mark, that's quite a stretch. And two, Luke doesn't mention any scribes here. So we're really left with only one audience that Jesus could be speaking to here, and that's his disciples. He's saying to them, faithless and twisted generation, how long am I supposed to put up with you? How long am I supposed to bear with you? And we know that this is who he's speaking to because Jesus, right afterwards, right, all were astonished at the majesty of God, but while they were all marveling at everything he was doing, Jesus said to his disciples, in the midst of all that's happening, right? This is like a Super Bowl moment almost, right? Imagine the Eagles several years back. This is going to take a lot of imagination. The Eagles several years back win the Super Bowl. It actually happened. It really did. You don't have to imagine that part. But imagine that as soon as that happens, Doug Peterson calls a team meeting. That'd be out of place, right? You don't call team meetings unless there's something wrong. They had just won the Super Bowl. All you do at that point is you celebrate the win. You don't call a team meeting. Whenever there's a players-only meeting, you know something has gone tremendously wrong. Games are not being won. Plays are not being run. It's a total disaster. Jesus calls a team meeting here. And he says to his disciples, in response to their faithlessness and their perversion, let these words sink into your ears. Now, I'm not an ancient language scholar. I presume that most of you are not either ancient language scholars. But when Jesus says the words, let these words sink into your ears, do you get the sense he's a little frustrated? Do you get the sense that the idiom that might fit best here is, hey, let this get through those thick skulls of yours. Yeah, I'm talking to you 12. Thick skulls. Get this into your brains. What's the thing that's so important for Jesus to communicate to these guys in this team-only meeting? The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men. The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men. And Luke tells us, but they didn't understand this saying, and it was concealed from them, so that they might not perceive it. And they were afraid to ask him about this saying. there's a question here. Why can't they perceive it? Does God intentionally hide this from them? Does Jesus cover their eyes in order to not get it? Well, I would say no. No, there's not an intentional hiding here for two reasons. One, because Jesus says, I want you to get this. Let these words sink into your ears. I want this to penetrate beyond whatever it is that's blocking you. And the other thing is, if you look back, just a chapter before, it's 8:9. It's right after Jesus tells the parable of the sower and the seed. And when his disciples asked him, hey, what was that? What did the thing with the seeds and the rockiness and the good, so what's going on there? Jesus says, to you it's been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of God. But for others, they are in parables, so that seeing they may not see. So here, when Jesus says, let these words sink into your ears, the Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they don't get it, it's not because God has hidden it from them. It's actually because they have hidden themselves from him. They have almost an Adam and Eve-like response, right? And they were afraid to ask him anything. They knew they had frustrated him. They knew they had messed up. And they said, you know what? Rather than push forward, why don't we just take a step back? See if we can smooth things over. But there was still something wrong, and Jesus was pointing at their hearts. How do we know there's something wrong? Well, look back just at the very beginning of this chapter, 9, verse 1. And he called the 12 together and gave them power and authority over all what? Demons. Over which demons? I will sit here until someone says it. There we go. All right. I lead men's studies, and if you don't force them to say it, then they're never going to say anything. All demons. So what has gone so terribly wrong that just 36 verses later we find out they're not doing it anymore? They don't have authority over even one in verse 37. What's gone wrong? Why have they forgotten how to walk? What is it that their brains and their hearts are focused on instead of walking? Well, Jesus points to himself to start off with. He says, I see there's a major problem here, that you guys have gotten distracted and fragmented from the goal at hand. So let me just remind you what the goal is. It's for the Son of Man to be delivered into the hands of men. That preposition there, into, is important. The disciples really wanted him to be delivered from, out of the hands of men. You see, Jesus had just been up on a mountaintop. Clouds circled around it, Moses and Elijah coming down, the Father's booming bass voice speaking and saying, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." And Moses and Elijah had been speaking to him of his exodus, literally his exodus. And so here, apparently, it seems that we have 3 of the disciples coming down the mountain high-fiving and saying, the Exodus is on its way. Do you know what happened with Moses' Exodus? Lots of stuff happened with Moses' Exodus, so I don't expect you to answer that, because we'd be here for a very long time. But the Egyptians ended up at the bottom of the sea. That's the important part for John and James and Peter and Andrew and so forth. The Egyptians ended up at the bottom of the sea. And you know what? Here comes Jesus' exodus. So that means pretty soon here, the Romans are going to end up at the bottom of the sea, and we are going to possess the land of promise just like we're supposed to. Jesus knows in their hearts they have gotten distracted because they are kingdom building. Kingdom building, that's good, right? Your kingdom come, your will be done, right? That sounds like familiar language. That's the stuff that Jesus taught us to do. But the real question that Jesus poses to these guys is, whose kingdom are you building? Because this king is soon going to be delivered into the hands of men, not from the hands of men. But they don't ask any further. They're too afraid and they hide. They don't sew fig leaves together for themselves because they've already got clothes. And so then some measure of time passes as they're walking from one place to another, and an argument arises among them as to which of them was the greatest. I love this. This is such a guy move. Right? There's no qualifier here, right? Not the greatest Jew, not the greatest disciple, just the greatest. I think I've actually said during a sermon at one point on this platform, I want my children to tell me that I am the greatest of all time. Period. Bar none. There's something in us, guys. I was actually at a funeral a couple weeks ago, and this didn't come from a granddaughter. It came from a grandson. I'm LaRue Grass's favorite grandson, right? There's something in us, right? I have said in front of my brother and my mother in my lifetime, I'm my mother's favorite son. And I've said it in front of my brother and my grandparents. I'm the favorite grandchild. I am the favorite associate pastor. I can say that because Pavel's not here this week, so he forfeits. There's something in us that wants to be the best. And, you know, I think it's a male category to want to be the absolute best. But females want to be thought of really well. They want people to acknowledge the kingdom that they are shaping, and by the kingdom I mean their husbands and their children and the narrative of whatever their work is. They want people to see it and to think well of it. We are all ourselves building a kingdom, just like these guys. The question is, who's the king? Whose kingdom are we building? The answer Jesus gives is a humiliating one. Of course, the root of that is humility, humbleness, but it's a humiliating one. To this question of who's the greatest, Jesus doesn't say, you knuckleheads. And in that, there is grace and faithfulness on Jesus' part. All through this passage, there's grace and faithfulness. Because he doesn't say, faithless and twisted generation, I'm done with you. He says, guys, come over here. Let's talk this through. And then we have another right after it. Guys, let's talk this through. And so he takes a little kid and he sets him in front of them. And he says, this kid here, if anyone receives this child in my name, he receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. And when Jesus says, receives. I think it's helpful to just take a look back. Where does he use this previously? Well, he uses it in chapter 9, verse 5. Right in this section where he has sent the disciples off to go cast out demons and heal in his name and to proclaim the coming kingdom. He says in verse 5, "And wherever they don't receive you, when you leave that town, shake off the dust from your feet as a testimony against them." Jesus says, anyone who responds to this child in my name, who receives him, who receives the message of the kingdom, receives the King, receives me, receives my Father. Anyone who responds to that message and receives, let me tell you who is greatest. Jesus says, "For he who is least among you all is the one who is great." Here's the message Jesus gives to these guys. Wouldn't you rather God do all of this great stuff by building you up completely and wholly and totally? He holds this kid in front of him and he says, "Hey, tell me, what does he have going for him? Does he have any money? No. Does he have any followers? No. Does he have any kids in order to provide inheritance and extend the family line? No. Is he anyone's apprentice? No. Does he have a skill? No. He has dimples. But in ancient Near Eastern Israel, dimples don't get you very far. At least not if you don't have a job and a family and some sort of direction in your life. This kid doesn't have any of that. And Jesus says, the greatest one in the kingdom is one like this, who's wholly and totally dependent on God coming in and making something great of him. If you're trying to make something great of yourself, you've got it backwards. And that's exactly the spot where the disciples find themselves. Which one of us is the greatest? Whose kingdom are they building? When I was in seminary, I was probably about 2 years in. Sam was probably about 2, which makes Lucas stroller bound. He's roughly 6 months old. And we are taking a walk through the neighborhood. This is Arlington, Texas. It is the second promised land. And in that place, there are sidewalks everywhere. So we can walk without fear of being run over or hit by a vehicle. So we would do that all the time. Now, Pennsylvania drivers are crazy. So we would take a walk, and on one occasion we found ourselves walking, and I was pushing the stroller, and as I am wont to do, I was leading the charge, because if we're going to take a walk, we're going to walk. You guys can trail behind, but we're getting this done. And as was normal, on this occasion, Mom, Amber, and Sam were trailing behind. And they were talking about things. I was using my fatherly art of ignoring, so I don't know what they were talking about. But from the back, I hear Sam say something that appears to be directed my direction, and I say yes or okay or sure. I have no idea what I said. The next thing I know, I am being clobbered with a switch. My 2-year-old son is just back there whipping me with a branch. And I turn around, and in good Christ-like fashion, I grab the branch, I break it over my knee, and I say, "What are you doing?" And my wife says, "Greg, he asked you if you want to play Jesus and the soldiers." Oh, Sorry, buddy. There I had my 2-year-old son. It reminds me a little bit of the crowd that gathers up here. And they seem to know every answer before Anna actually says it. There's this really great, I hope it's godly pride that swells in me when I see these children answer well and correct and get the truths of the gospel, the simple truths of the gospel. They enunciate so clearly. And here I had my 2-year-old son acting out a scene from the scriptures, one that actually leads to salvation. And my response was to turn around, grab his prop, and break it in half. Whose kingdom was I building? As a seminary student, as someone training to get up here and tell you guys what the scriptures say. Whose kingdom was I building? Whose kingdom are you building day in and day out when you go to work? When you're at home interacting with your kids? When you show up here? Think about the last year and a half and how your kingdom has been threatened. Have you remembered that you're not building your own kingdom, that you're not the king or queen of that kingdom? You're building a different kingdom. You are citizens of a different land, of a different country. And the kingdom that we are building has a king that allows himself to be delivered into the hands of men. John, in verse 49, reminds me a lot of the woman in John chapter 4. The woman at the well, who, when Jesus says, go call your husband, she says, I don't have a husband. And he says, well, that's true. Now, in fairness, you have had 5 husbands, and the one that you're living with now, you two are just having fun. And she says, wow, that hurt. And this is awkward, and I think I shall change the subject. Sir, I perceive you're a prophet. John seems to have a similar response. Jesus says, hey, knuckleheads, you're too focused on being the greatest. Why don't you make yourself like this one, like the least, and let God promote you? John says, Master, we aren't total imbeciles. We haven't completely messed things up. Consider this. There was someone we saw casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because, well, he doesn't follow with us. I love to picture facial expressions on Jesus, just the whole body language. It's not scriptural, right? I can't make a case that he does any of this, but I can just see him just, a laugh of exasperation, and throws his head down and shakes it, and his shoulders just sink. I mean, this guy was just transfigured on the mountain just 12 hours ago. Has this mountaintop experience, and his disciples that he spent a couple years with can't get it together for a couple minutes just to hear him rebuke them and then get in line. No. Jesus says, don't stop him, for the one who is not against you is for you. Jesus says, wait a minute. Let me get this straight. You guys saw someone casting out demons in my name, And you stopped him because he wasn't wearing a t-shirt that said disciple? He was identifying with me and not with you, and you thought we should stop this guy. The guy who doesn't follow with us, but who actually was casting out demons. You, the guys who got called out just a half hour ago for not being able to cast, you're telling him to stop. These guys are all about guarding their own kingdom. It's hard for us to let go of that. You know, when we were put here at the very beginning, I've referenced Adam and Eve a couple times, when we were put here at the very beginning, our mission, the thing that God called us to do, was to fill the earth and subdue it. We are, as image bearers, kingdom builders at heart. But in our fallen, marred, twisted and perverted image, we have gotten ourselves distracted. The disciples here, with the Son of God incarnate standing in front of them, have gotten themselves distracted. They are too busy guarding their own kingdom. Everywhere you go, you are building a kingdom. Whose kingdom are you building? I take a ton of solace, I guess, comfort from this passage, because it's not just Peter. Right? I can imagine during this conversation of who's the greatest, that Peter throws his name into the ring, right? And John and James are like, well, yeah, you were just up on the mountain, but we're not the ones that stuck our foot in our mouths. Right? We know Peter messes up all the time. But here, Luke does us the favor of just lumping them all in. And it's not just one error. It's not one misstep. It's over and over and over. We aren't even, next week you'll see another one where the Samaritans, they don't receive Jesus. And James and John say, how about we firebomb the city? That would be good, huh? We could do it. You can't even cast out a demon. You think you can firebomb the city? Again, knuckleheads, over and over and over. And the comfort that I take from this passage is that Jesus never sweeps them aside. Every time he takes the opportunity to correct and to train. He is always about correcting and training for their good and for the glory of the Father. So if you have forgotten how to walk, and by how to walk I mean how to build the kingdom of Christ, Jesus says you only need two things. Take my lead, the one who is going to allow himself to be delivered into the hands of men. Take my lead and follow me like a child. Don't think about your prospects, all your gifts and talents, the things that you bring to the world. Think about what I can accomplish through you in order to build not your kingdom, but mine. Let's pray. Father, you see everything, and because you see everything, you know that it is far easier to preach a sermon than to live one. And so, Lord, I pray that you would find in us childlike faith, that you'd find a bunch of toddlers recognizing that we aren't really even very good at walking, at doing the basics, and that in our state, we need you to take us by the hand and to show us how to walk and how to keep walking and to stay faithful in that. Father, I pray that you would help us to see in our own hearts our desire to make ourselves kings of our own kingdoms. And Lord, that you would purge that from us so that we can live in such a way that puts you in your proper place, not subverted by us or supplanted by us, but lifted up, glorified by the Father, so that all of us would bow with knees and hearts, declaring you King of kings and Lord of lords. I pray these things through the Son and by the Spirit. Amen.